Joining a host club was an extreme experience for me, including turning down a job and living in a dorm. It was a dramatic change from all of my previous experiences and inclination. I got to Tokyo in late 2021 during the peak of COVID, and I was only able to even get into the country because of my Japanese citizenship through my parents. I was under quarantine for the first 14 days, and I was told that during the day I would get random video calls on the quarantine app to see if I'm inside my room. I decided to take walks at night when they wouldn't be calling me, leaving my phone inside. When I was on these walks, I came across these big, bizarre, very bright signs with young men on them that were extremely dressed up with professionally made up hair and makeup, and they were often feminine looking. Dozens and dozens of these signs covered an area that was near my room. There were probably more of these host club billboards than there were billboards of anything else in the area. I was very confused, and I looked up what the billboards were online, and I started reading about host clubs where women pay to drink with men. All this just seemed kind of silly and insane and unreal. Really, it felt like a different planet. Every day I would take walks and then watch videos about host clubs in my room. Soon after this, I decided to try to work at a host club. There was only one way to find out what these places were really like. I think that I'm motivated by curiosity more than anything else in life, and I couldn't imagine my state of mind after having been inside these host clubs. So I had an overwhelming curiosity to attain that state, to know what went on in there, to know what it felt like in there. Right at this time, I actually received an offer to work in Tokyo for an American tech company for a good salary. I was in a kind of manic, obsessive state at the time, I think, and I just had to go into the host clubs, see for myself how it worked. I wanted to see why any girl would pay for that kind of thing, and what the hosts were like, and what it was like for the people making millions of dollars at my age and younger. I knew that even if I were to read everything there is out there to read about host clubs, it would still be entirely different from actually being in that environment. I really did consider accepting the job offer. It would have been my first job out of college, and could have set me on a good path for the rest of my career. But I turned down the job offer. And everything in this video is true, by the way. I applied to a number of host clubs so that I could get a look into different types and sizes of host clubs. One of the first ones I applied to was called Top Dandy, which is the biggest host club in Japan, and it's also the flagship host club of the biggest host club group called Group Dandy. I got the line contact for the host club from their website and set up an interview. Line is, by the way, the messaging app that everyone uses in Japan. It's like WhatsApp. For the interview, I put on a white shirt, some dark slacks, and a suit, and dress shoes. I walked into the host club at the appointed time, which was immediately already a surreal and intense experience by itself. The interior was gorgeous and luxurious, dozens of glamorously made up hosts hanging out before the store's opening. I met the person in charge of hiring, who was a former host and looked like he was in his early 30s. He was perfectly well dressed like a host. He warmly greeted me and began to talk about the host club, and then asked me about my background. He showed a flattering interest in my background, and he talked about a family member of his who lived in America and about his interest in America, or his fascination with America. I actually enjoyed this conversation, and I was pleasantly surprised by these commonalities and others that he brought up. Overall, he looked really impressive, and at the same time, attentive and charismatic in conversation. I guess this person was honed through the years of working as a host. At the end of the interview, he walked me out and told me that as this was the flagship location, he recommended that I start at one of their other locations and let me know he would be glad to help out with this. I'm not sure how much of what he was saying was true or just politeness, but he said everything in such a pleasant way that I came away with such a positive, friendly feeling towards him. I thought that the rejection was not too big of a deal because I had started at the most prestigious club that I could think of, and there were 300 other host clubs just in Kabukicho, which is the red light district in Tokyo and the epicenter for host clubs. After this, I interviewed at a club called Aihonten, which was founded in 1971 as the first ever host club. I went into Aihonten and met the general manager of the club. He greeted me and took me to some isolated seats where we sat down to talk. This man looked like he was in his 40s, and although he was dressed in a suit, he didn't come across like a host at all. He was somewhat big and manly and came across like a friendly uncle. There's so many airplanes where I'm recording, by the way. Hope it doesn't cut in too much. We had a friendly conversation and he was very complimentary. After a quick conversation, he urged me to join their host club. He also said that we should have a drink together sometime and to please message him to do that. After this interview, I was sat down at some tables where hosts were entertaining customers. At each table I joined, the hosts would ask me about my background and we would have some small talk along with the customer. It was really helpful to have my unusual background here. It usually led straight into a lively conversation. After maybe 30 minutes of going around a few tables, the interview and the trial process was over, and I was greeted by the general manager again, who urged me to join and to message him for that drink. I was left with a positive impression of the manager. The club itself was in a temporary space that was fairly small because its very impressive main venue was being renovated at the time. He handed me some cash at the end. This had been promised on the job listing as payment for doing the trial, which was what I had just done by sitting and chatting at the tables. Many host clubs offered this incentive, which were generally 5,000 to 10,000 yen, and the minimum wage is around 1,000 yen, so it's a decent incentive for just an hour or two of time. I interviewed and was accepted to several other host clubs after this. The host club I decided to work at first at was a very small one with maybe 10 to 15 hosts total. This host club uniquely offered a 10-day training period, which I could use to see whether I wanted to join for a longer period of time. I also liked the smaller size of the club, where I thought I would be able to more quickly get to know the other hosts and customers and develop a rapport. I also liked the hosts that I met that day. They were friendly and we were able to talk about hobbies and other topics. On the day of the interview, I sat at a table with the number one host there and his customer. He excitedly talked about the anime Violet Evergarden. It was funny hearing about anime in this setting. I enjoyed his enthusiasm for his hobby. The host club had a structured training program, which I will talk about in an upcoming video. Here I will talk about the other things I experienced when joining the host club. For example, I had to really think about what to wear each night before going to the host club. I had dress shoes, dark slacks, and a suit, and I changed the shirt I was wearing each day. I would sit at tables and talk with the customers and the other hosts. The conversation topics were generally basic, and I've forgotten so much as a result. It's basically energetic small talk with the intent to have the customer have fun and feel good. We were told to never ask about their job because very commonly they are in sex-related work and generally wouldn't want to talk about it in that setting. And even for girls who had office jobs, we were encouraged to not talk about work unless they wanted to, since the host club was supposed to relieve their minds from serious thoughts and stress. At this host club, I remember talking about ramen, anime, a lot about America and traveling, about neighborhoods in Tokyo, and a lot of random stuff like that. Many girls were just dumbfounded when I told them I had joined the host club soon after moving to Japan. One girl yelled at me that becoming a host is a really bad decision, maybe half joking. Multiple customers asked me whether it wasn't scary coming to the neighborhood of Kabukisho for the first time, telling me that they would never have come here if they hadn't been brought here by their host. On Halloween, the hosts and customers dressed up in various costumes, and more orders came in than usual. One host there said he was saving up money for a law degree. Another host worked at a clothing store during the day. Another host was 19 and went to a culinary school during the day. He said he was saving up to start a restaurant after graduating. We were told to decide on a dream and talk about it as a way to encourage customers to give money, so it's hard to tell how true each story is, though I mostly believe them, but it might vary how truly serious they are about their goals. One host who was training me said that he completely made up his dream to start a clothing store. He said he had no interest in doing that it was just made up for the customers. On the final day of my training period, the hosts were hanging out in a back room, and I was able to have some longer conversations. I think only the two people training me were aware that this was my final training day. I think that after 2 weeks of seeing me 5 days a week, people were getting used to me, and it made for more interesting conversations. It led to more interesting conversations. One host complained about his clothing store job and about the senpai there, which are like more senior coworkers there. He said being a host was much better. I think he was planning to quit his job after making a little bit more money as a host. I talked with another host who was nearly becoming the number one host. We hadn't talked much until then, but we found out about a mutual interest in watching the UFC and martial arts in general. He seemed really happy to find someone there with the same interests, and said as much. I enjoyed my conversation with him. I was just beginning to really enjoy the group of people there. It was bittersweet leaving that day, knowing I wouldn't be back, but also being unable to say goodbye. The next day, I sent the trainer at the host club a message thanking him for his time there and saying that I wouldn't be coming back. I received a warm message with best wishes for my future endeavors. This feels like an ending, but it was actually after this that most of my host club experiences happened. I had accomplished my goal of seeing and getting a reasonable understanding of the small host club. At the same time, I had been looking into other host clubs to join, to see a host club on a bigger scale with more money flowing through. After the interview process, I chose to join a bigger host club that was bringing in a lot of money. When I showed up at the interview for the club that I would eventually join, the general manager greeted me, a former host who looked to be in his late 30s. He asked me about my motivations for wanting to join a host club. I can't remember what I said here, but I remember at times talking honestly about the shock that I encountered when I found out about host clubs on my walks, and I talked about my curiosity to see this wild world. This manager said he earned some massive amount of money, an amount that it would be impossible to earn in a normal job. He talked about buying luxury cars and gambling tens of thousands of dollars in Macau while being by far the youngest person there. He said that I could earn that kind of money here and nowhere else. I found this whole pitch really distasteful. In the background during the interview, I could see multiple bottles being opened. Whenever a customer buys a bottle over a certain amount of money, there is a small performance that goes along with it, where some or all of the hosts gather around the customer, depending on the level of the bottle purchased. I was impressed by the frequency and the visceral physical impact of the performances here. I was also greeted by the number one host there, who was 23 at the time, which was my age at the time. As usual, I sat at some tables and then left for the night, promising to send the manager a message with my decision. I joined this host club, but the really crazy part is that I also decided to join the dorms. Joining the dorms would let me get a lot more insight into hosts and their lives. Not living in the dorms would make this whole project only a half measure. My curiosity overwhelmed me. I feel like I'm writing about an insane person. I'm astounded by my actions here. I could never do this now. Even the idea of attempting something like this makes me nauseous. I have no idea why I was able to do any of this. One thing led to another, and I got on the curiosity roller coaster, seemingly out of my control and out of my mind.